All right, welcome everybody back to the podcast. Today we've got a great guest, my buddy Braden, aka Spooks. Welcome.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, Braden is someone I met in Vancouver, but actually he's originally from Saskatchewan, I believe, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, really inspiring dancer to me personally, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have him on here and share his background and perspectives for all of you people. So to start off, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, do you mind just giving them a little intro and maybe how you kind of got into hip hop and breaking and that stuff?
Sure. I also wanted to mention, for context, I think today you were already interviewing like rocks, right? So I feel a little small time
Don't
compared
think
to
about
that. I'm
that.
just like, oh
Don't think
man,
about
how am I
that.
gonna be as interesting as that guy? But
Don't compare yourself to people, right? That's yeah,
yes,
right.
yes, big mistake as an artist. Um, but yeah, I'm from Saskatchewan, Saskatoon, uh, and I got into breaking. I was interested. I mean, yeah, I have one of those stories of like, well, like seriously breaking, like, maybe like 10 years, but like I've been into breaking for like 20 years,
Right, right.
So it was like elementary school that I became interested,
Wow.
and then was sort of a filthy casual for most of high school. Um, and like late high school and like early college, I sort of learned like how to practice and was exposed to other people and like learned like you break every day and you break for like a couple hours and like you practice a move repeatedly to see if it, like you know
Right, right,
those things like it took a while to get those concepts.
right.
But anyway, yeah, I started breaking more seriously and then moved to Winnipeg. Dangerous Goods, I think, picked up me and Andy Truth.
Hmm.
I think I was kind of a package deal, to be honest, but like as it worked out, and they saw some potential, and so like I had a couple of good years. Well, no, it was about a year of training there, and all
Hmm.
I did was like work and break pretty
Hmm.
much. So that was a productive time, and like Bob and the rest of those guys were good coaches.
Hmm.
A coach like I think the I've heard someone say like a good coach is someone who will criticize you honestly, but who you trust.
Hmm.
So they're not nice to you, but like they'll
Hmm.
versus like a random person coming up to practice, like that move's whack, or like change your form. Like you don't care
Yeah,
what they think because you don't trust them. And like they might
yeah.
be right, but anyway, so
It's a good point.
it was productive coaching that I got
Yeah.
there. And then came back and had some moderate success with like regional competition and
Hmm.
was recognized nationally a little bit. Um, and then I moved to Vancouver in 2015, which I moved a little sooner than I intended to. I think it was actually you guys I messaged early on, like, hey, I'm coming and I kind of need a job. And all I know how to do is bartend at this point. I'm just a college student.
Right.
Um, but I moved. I was actually more thinking of going to the East Coast. I knew I was going
Hmm.
to leave Saskatoon for a while.
Hmm.
Um, and at that point, I actually wasn't sure about like how hard I was going to be dancing when I moved. Like it was more just, I'm going to move to these places and we'll see. Um, and then the reason I moved to Vancouver early before I finished university, I finished like my last year of university remotely
Hmm.
from Vancouver was because I had a friend who got cancer and he was in Vancouver and he said, well, like he's likely to survive, but he's got to do some chemo
Hmm.
and he's going to continue working. So I could basically just come live with him right now and just do his laundry and cook and like
Just help them
help
out.
him get through chemo,
Yeah. It's
which
a good
kind of
friend.
helped me like make the decision of when to move. Like I don't know how long it would have actually taken because you want to have enough money saved up and I didn't have any of that. But he's like, okay, well, you don't have to pay rent for quite a while.
Right.
So
Well,
I kind
it's
of
a good
just did
friend.
that. Yeah. but he's
Yeah,
fine now. It worked out fine.
that's good.
He's very successful now.
That would have been a really dark turn if it hadn't worked out in this podcast. But yeah, that's
Yeah, I wouldn't tell that story, I don't think.
yeah. Um,
So readily.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So can you like kind of talk a bit about yeah, what it was like starting out in like Saskatoon and what the scene was like, if at all, if there was any at all, kind of thing. Like, yeah, what was it like learning there? Because for people who don't know, like Saskatchewan is like in the middle of Canada, and it's all like prairies. I think
Mhm.
I've never actually been there. And then Saskatoon is like maybe the biggest city or one of the bigger cities, but it's
In
still
Saskatchewan, yeah, they're now around 300,000 people.
yeah.
Back then it was closer to two.
Hmm.
Um, but like somewhat urban. I don't know,
Right,
like they had a little bit of a hip hop scene and there were b-boys.
right.
There's actually a few really good ones
Hmm.
when I started. Um, but we did a lot of like the internet had just come to be
What
and
year was this when you were starting out,
mm,
roughly?
to early 2000s,
Right, it's about the same time
like
as me.
2001, 2002 was when I first, yeah, I think got interested.
That was like the awkward era of you still had like VHS, and then it was transitioning to DVDs,
Mhm.
and then YouTube hadn't really like hit yet, and like streaming and stuff. So you had stuff online that would occasionally pop up, but you had to download it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
kids these
It,
days, they
man,
don't know.
yeah. So a VHS was actually like I was like casually interested,
Hmm.
my friend and I, and then his mom happened to go to New York and knew that he was kind of interested in it, so she brought back we call it the Blue Video, but it was a freestyle session, or not freestyle, out for fame
Oh, okay.
West Coast finals, which was so it was like one of my first like this is what a tournament looks like, and these are all
Hmm.
these different crews, and I didn't know this, but like out for fame was a huge,
Yeah.
like a huge milestone, and it like everybody leveled up hugely in the United States mostly, and so this was like massive monkeys had just leveled up, and Circle of Fire and
Hmm.
Rhythm Bug, and just so I thought this was like what breaking is basically,
Yeah.
where in reality it was a lot of actually more like abstract crews. Like I don't know if you call it like Circle of Fire and Massive Monkeys. They're not like
They're not like the traditional like East Coast kind of
and like
breakdowns.
Cujo was there and Midas and so lots of people who didn't they just kind of did whatever they wanted. So that
Yeah.
was I'm glad that that was my first like exposure to like a lot of breaking.
Hmm.
Prior to that, it was just music videos and anyway, Saskatoon.
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of derailed it.
They yeah. So the main crew was Skill Force,
Uh huh.
a bunch of Aboriginal guys, but they were cool.
Hmm.
Um,
Who were some of the people that were in that crew
I
that you
guess the main
remember?
one, not they wouldn't like me saying the main one, but like the most probably notable one was T Rock,
Hmm.
Terrence, who I think he did the most traveling and like probably had the most like national. Like I think he was. I think most people knew who he was at one point in
Hmm.
the country. Like he was really strong.
Hmm.
Um, and Jimmy Majestic and Cody and Junior.
Hmm.
There's some other ones.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, they were, I think, had been similarly inspired by like VHSs that they got their hands on and like early internet. But they were a few years ahead of us. Like we were just starting, but
Hmm.
they did, I think once they learned that we were like really interested, like my friends and I kept showing up to things and like
Yeah.
practices that we knew about, then they started to become like pretty helpful
Hmm.
or at least like encouraging.
Hmm.
Um, but not really like coaching or anything. They
Yeah.
were just like, yeah, come, and like I would do some shitty move, and then they'd be like, ah, good job. So like, they like tolerated us.
Right. Right.
Um, and then yeah, so a lot of practicing. like thankfully I met Andy Truth after a couple of years, and he was kind of a natural, as most people would know around that era. Like he just picked it up really fast, and he was athletic and he was creative.
Yeah,
Um,
that guy's crazy.
so then I think a lot my development then became just like kind of keeping up with him, and I did a lot of what he would suggest.
Hmm.
Um,
But that's always really good to have someone else to sort of like help motivate you, help push you, that
mhm.
kind of thing. Like that's
Yeah,
kind of one thing that I'm kind of curious about is like learning, say, in a smaller community, um, is like these ways of keeping yourself motivated or yeah, wanting to push things, and like that's one
mhm.
really good way is having someone else there to
Yeah, absolutely.
who's also motivated
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, and driven.
We did start to level up, I think, when we started traveling. He went to one thing prior to me, and then because he was talking to J Bugs on
Mm-hmm.
like some forum,
Right.
and then after that he was like, Braden, like we have to start traveling. This is a thing you can do. You can just go to Calgary, or you can go to Winnipeg.
Yeah.
So then we started doing that more frequently, and that helped with motivation. Um, but I guess one benefit of being in one of those smaller places is you don't really have a thing to fit into. Like,
Mm-hmm.
not to denigrate the bigger cities, but like I think there's a Toronto style that is somewhat nebulous, but can be sort of,
There's a
when you see it.
certain way. Yeah. Yeah. You know when you see it. Yeah.
So there's some benefit to not feeling any pressure to do that.
Yeah.
But then I think I did, like, for a long time, I was just kind of the wacky guy that did random, you know, whatever he wanted and didn't really like have a cohesive plan.
What was your kind of, I guess, like style? What did it sort of look like in the early days?
I did a lot of biting, I think. So,
Very honest of you. I
but
guess most people do that when they're really starting out,
yeah,
or
I
like
can
in the
think of a
early
few
days.
things that I like. This is in like year one, year two kind of thing, but like I was doing some of the footwork that I saw Free do in that
Okay.
video, and like Jerome Ski.
Yeah.
And I was trying to do the things that like Juice Boogie would do, but I
Mm-hmm.
like he's pretty athletic.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of those I would just saw moves, like I was picking a lot of moves from that video basically, and then we got a hold of the Brown video, which was the East Coast finals. And so then yeah, you pick a lot from that. So mostly watching like the high level states b-boys, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
I think that's a lot how a lot of people in Canada, at least like maybe in our sort of um, era, when
mhm.
like those early 2000s, I think a lot of us got exposed to breaking in that way. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I was
I
I was
guess
the same too.
yeah. I mean, what else are you gonna do?
Yeah.
I was like out of shape. Like I started behind a little bit. I was kind of a fat kid, and then like even into early high school, it was pretty heavy,
Mm-hmm.
and like not flexible, and so I think I like had to just figure out, like, okay, I'm not gonna do anything like mind blowing
Mm-hmm.
athletically, so I got to just do some interesting stuff.
Weird alien stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like I remember Midas, he did like he was almost popping. He just like put one leg up and he kind of like locks his arms and he just like turns and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
goes back
yeah.
to break. So like I was like, oh, I could do that. Like, and that's cool. And people, when he did
Yeah,
it, liked it.
yeah. I think it's really interesting hearing about how like who were the people that inspired you, like not you specifically, but people in general, and you hear about who they inspired, and that kind of like helps shape their view of breaking in a lot of ways. And like, yeah,
Hmm.
having that, because you mentioned there's a lot of like that West Coast influence on you, but then seeing a bit of that East Coast too, and I was like very similar too. I got exposed to a lot of this West Coast stuff. Like, I
Mm,
didn't see Out for Fame until later, but I saw
mm,
like Freestyle Session. I think it was Seven. Was like one of the
mm,
first things I saw, or like, and just seeing that, and they have that, like that it's less traditional. It's a little more abstract. It's not abstract, but it's a little
mm,
more like outside the box kind of thing. And then later on, I got exposed to like
mm.
people like Boogie Brats and really starting to see like Rocksteady and these
Yeah.
kind of things, and it's like those early influences really they're formative in like
Hmm.
how you think about breaking in a lot of ways.
It's weird because I don't know what I like. I always struggle with what I would tell like a beginner because
Yeah,
I think it kind of worked out for me. Like I feel like I have something now that's worthwhile. Um, but I did have to like go back and like learn how to do a three step
yeah,
at like year 10, and I just realized like I don't know how to do this basic stuff, and it like I think it reflects badly if you can't do it.
yeah.
Um, and then I know like I looking back, I could see why like a lot of people were kind of unsure about me because of that. Like
Mm.
I wasn't really respecting like the levels of the game and like the foundation. Like I didn't know foundation was a thing for many years.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think it's super important now, and I think I looked better as a b-boy after learning it.
yeah. But like, to play devil's advocate sort of thing, it's one of those things where it's like there's no real like wrong way to do things as long as you look at it as a process and a journey. And
Hmm.
it's like if you had learned all that stuff early on and you never got exposed to any of that more abstract, outside the box kind of things, like you might just look like a generic, like New York imitation b-boy,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. So it's all like, I always think that's one of the most interesting things is, um, like the people's experiences and like varied experiences. Like you, so for example, you coming from a smaller community and you building a lot of stuff just based on like a couple VHSs that you saw,
Hmm.
versus someone now who has like all the information in the world, but there's like drawbacks to that as well, right? And like it's the same.
Yeah.
It's very similar with another guy in our crew from Victoria. It's
Hmm.
like Victoria was a very small scene. He mentioned something very similar of like
I
you
think
go out, you
also
get a little thing, yeah.
Winnipeg, people from Winnipeg will say the same thing.
Hmm.
They had like random videos and like a couple times someone randomly showed up in Winnipeg and like battled everybody, and they'd have footage of that.
Yeah,
Um, I forget who it was, but some guy who was like more of a popper, I think, came from Toronto and just battled everybody. And I guess everyone just watched that video a lot
yeah,
and like I don't want to say copied it, but it
yeah,
was an influence.
yeah. Um, can you talk, yeah, a little bit? You mentioned a little bit, but just talk a bit about, yeah, the importance to you of like, yeah, traveling and getting outside of your community, your smaller community, and
Mhm.
seeing other things.
Yeah, it's really important, especially if you want to compete at all. Uh, it's a huge disadvantage not to be able to battle very frequently
Hmm.
strangers. Like you can battle your crew at practice, but it's not the same.
Yeah,
Um, and I remember, yeah, it's you like I remember telling some people from Toronto in a conversation, like I battle like 4 or 5 times a year, you know, like I don't bet like it's expensive and it takes time.
yeah,
And they were like, wow, like I battle every week at least once.
yeah,
It's just I'd go to the pool hall or whatever it was, and they just
yeah,
it's very normal. So you're at a disadvantage when it comes to like testing yourself and like working on your mental game.
hmm,
Um, but you'll like have new stuff. Like if you're happy with what you've been working on, you kind of get to show up every few months or where
hmm,
however long you're able to travel for, however frequently, and like here's my new set of stuff and like see how it does.
Yeah.
and then you can come back, and it'll strike them because they haven't seen you in a long time, and so
Hmm.
people become interested in your journey. That was my experience a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But traveling, sorry,
Go ahead.
you got to do it, yeah. Um, and in the prairies, it's hard. Like I think Winnipeg actually has it the worst, because it's really far to like Toronto from there, and it's also really far to like Saskatoon is the next closest, and that's like there's a couple battles in Saskatoon,
Right.
um,
I never really
unless they're
thought
going to
about that.
fly. Yeah, I mean you can fly. Back then, it didn't make sense to fly because we were poor, so it was like we had more time than money back then,
Yeah.
so it
Was
made sense to do road
Saskatoon
trips.
was Saskatoon like relatively close to say like Calgary?
It was like 6 or 7 hours to Calgary
Right.
driving.
And to Winnipeg, how long? How far was it?
Winnipeg was closer to 8 or 9. So it was,
Yeah.
yeah,
That.
it was painful. Andy and I took the bus a couple times to Winnipeg. You do it overnight,
Hmm.
and that was kind of rough.
Hmm.
But they were very cool to us. Like you travel there and you tell them you're coming, and they're very encouraging. And here's a
Hmm.
place to stay and
Yeah.
take you out. So
Yeah. That's one thing I wonder if that sort of like mentality still exists because we had the same like hospitality where you're going somewhere and it's like, oh, we're so broke, we don't have we don't want to pay for a hotel. It's like, hey, who do you know, can we stay at crash at someone's place, something like that. I wonder if that's still a thing with the current generation. I'll have to talk with some of these
mhm.
younger kids.
Yeah, I mean now we don't even like we want the hotel room now because like we need
Yeah.
a good sleep.
Yeah, yeah, you appreciate it more when as you get older, like personal space and stuff.
I would think so. Like I don't know why people wouldn't.
Yeah.
Although I mean I think maybe I have a general sense of like yeah, there's less like regional cohesion and
Hmm.
everything's just the world of breaking now.
Yeah.
Um, but the prairies, I don't know. I've seen some stuff lately that makes me think that like yeah, the prairies all kind of know each other, like the
Right.
younger
Yeah.
gen, and they hang out.
But yeah, I think that's one thing that maybe a lot of people who aren't from Canada don't really know or appreciate. Like, Canada is so spread out, and like
Mm,
these moments when people actually do connect from these different scenes and stuff are at least when I was dancing, they were like uh, really special because they didn't happen very often,
mm,
especially those like far like West Coast, East Coast sort of things.
mm,
Like, I'm sure I when I talked with Bob, he mentioned this a bit of like Winnipeg and the prairies being in the middle. You kind of get like a bit of both worlds, sort of,
mm,
or you have the possibilities. Easier to to go to either one, whereas like for Vancouver, it's way easier to just be like, oh, we'll go to Seattle,
mm.
or like if there's a big event, maybe we'll go to to Calgary. But going out to Toronto was like, that's like
Yeah,
costs quite a bit of money and like
yeah,
yeah
yeah. It's not reasonable,
yeah.
especially
But
right now.
yeah, especially now. But yeah, like some other scenes, like the European scene, is like super connected, even though maybe it still takes time. But it's like there's and this population is way bigger. I
Mhm.
mean, Canada's like a big country with a low population.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is. I mean, that's my general sense in all things competitive is that you tend to see like the big cities have more like top performers,
Hmm.
uh, just statistically. And I don't, and it's not just because it's a bigger city. Like it's because you have top performers that tend to gravitate to the big cities, and then they want top performers want to be around each other,
Hmm.
and so they you practice with the best and you compete against the best, and it just makes sense.
Yeah,
Um, but it's not, yeah, it's not impossible to be good at something from wherever you are.
for sure, for sure. But yeah, it comes
Um,
back to that idea of traveling too, right? Getting outside of your little I don't know what you put in, like bubble, right?
mhm. I can't emphasize enough though, like how important it is to become desensitized. Like it was really hard for me to get over the mental game and like just be calm and try to perform like I would perform at practice.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
every because you travel and you spend a bunch of money and you drive a bunch of hours and you like spend all night on somebody's basement floor thinking about the battle tomorrow and what you're gonna do. And so every time you do it, it feels like the Eminem song, like you only get one shot.
Can you sing a little
It's
bit more of that?
nah. So there's just it's hard not to put the pressure on yourself because you're like, I'm
Yeah,
not
for
gonna get
sure.
to do this again for like 6 months maybe.
Hmm.
So and like there have been times like Calgary used to have one touch, like
Oh yeah.
you do one round
Hmm.
and then you lose probably, and then you go home and then you just think about how that one round went for like months and months.
Yeah.
So any way that you can get exposure to that situation more frequently,
Yeah.
so that like any one round doesn't feel so monumental,
Hmm.
is would be helpful. But some people don't have that problem. I don't know.
Yeah. Those are those are definitely things that I think more people struggle with it than don't. Yeah. The mental
Yeah,
game is really tough.
I don't know. Like there's plenty of people. You and I both know some of them who are like, man, I'm not. I know I'm not going to get punched in the face, so it's all good. Like whatever happens, I know I'm not going to be physically fighting someone, so we're good. Like where their like mental game is at. So not to say that you should have a life where like you that's your bar of like something being cool is that you're not going to get hurt physically. But there's some people, mostly in the East Coast, that, are in that space.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people. I had very similar things of like you we when you it's like overthinking things and you put a lot of like pressure on yourself, and it does take a lot of work to just kind of like either realize that hey, it doesn't really matter that much, or
Mm-hmm.
it's like this weird balance because like it does mean a lot. You
Mm-hmm.
spend a lot of money and you want to make the most out of it, but
Mm-hmm.
if you focus too much on that, it's like throws you off the game, right?
Yeah.
And then you like what is his name? Drawing a blank. Tango. I talk to him all the time. He's like out in Japan here, but talking with him, and he's like bag of tricks. But even for him, like when they went to like Rocksteady anniversary, and he was ciphering something, and he just felt like really, I don't know, nervous or whatever, and it was like Gizmo had to like pull him aside. He's like, "What are you doing? Like, just why are you putting so much like pressure on yourself, or you just like
Mm-hmm.
you're not doing what you would normally do back at home. Like, just do that. Don't worry about this stuff." Like, I don't know exactly what he said, but that's how the gist of the story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That topic definitely extends beyond breaking. Like
Yeah.
the inner game of tennis. I read that. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then I did start meditating,
Mm. Yeah. I remember.
which yeah, it's kind of helpful.
Yeah.
It just helps with like external thoughts and just focusing on like what you're doing.
What was this inner game of tennis?
That's a yeah. I learned about that from I pay attention to the Super Smash Brothers competitive world,
Okay.
and they talk about it.
Yeah.
Which it's yeah, there's the idea of like the coaching brain and then the performing brain,
Uh huh.
and like while you're performing, the coach has to shut up basically. Like
Huh.
so you can't if you make like a slight error, you can't be like, oh, I made an error. Like you
Right.
just have to keep performing.
Hmm.
Um, it's more complicated than that, but uh, that's the idea, I guess, is
Yeah.
just like focusing, like looking ahead and just doing the thing and not like
Right.
not judging yourself while you're doing it, but just doing it.
Yeah. That's a super interesting way to like think about it, because like I don't know, maybe this is like the cool thing about humans is we can take an idea and think of it in all these different ways that explain it in a different way. And the way I
Mhm.
always thought of that same idea is like sort of I guess it's like a Buddhist sort of mentality, and I guess maybe that's why like meditation would help
Hmm.
too. Is like learning to just focus on like what's happening right now, not what you could be doing or what you did, but what's happening like right now.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's super interesting. I
but
never
that is
thought of
it.
that. Yeah.
That's like one of the best, I would say, if you spend a long career in breaking, that's got to be one of the best like lessons a person learns is like dealing with pressure and expectations
Yeah.
and disappointment,
Yeah.
uh, and like learning, yeah, not worrying about the future and not fretting about the past.
Hmm.
But that's, yeah, those are like life lessons that
Yeah,
some
for
people,
sure. For sure.
I mean, we all struggle with it because that's what our brain is designed to do, is to like reflect on mistakes we've made so that we don't make them again,
Hmm.
and like worry about all the possible scenarios that could unfold in front of us. Like it's natural to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you just mentioned that you follow the competitive Smash scene, like tournament scene and stuff like that. I do a little bit. I got a question about that. Maybe you can give some insight. I'm not sure. But what
Mm-hmm.
is with Smash players and like spiking their controllers all the time?
Man, I've been there.
Yeah?
Gamer
Is it
rage is unique.
but is
Like
it like Smash is just really rage inducing? And then
uh
because you have like a tiny controller or something like that?
they are pretty tough, so you can like be pretty rough with them.
Right.
But no, I mean I don't well, I'm reluctant to denigrate like that community too hard, but I think it does disproportionately, like compared to like Street Fighter or something,
Hmm.
attract like more awkward people. And, like there's other terms I might use that would be more offensive, but like there are a lot of people join that just because like they love Zelda and like they like
Yeah,
Link,
yeah,
and like I
yeah,
can go be Link and fight people in a tournament,
yeah. It's true.
and it's not because they like fighting games or like competitive stuff per se.
Right, right.
um Part of it. But man, I get gamer rage. Like more, it's more upsetting than anything in the real world to you just, I can't explain it. People talk about salt.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
like it feels like your blood is full of salt. Like it's like you can feel it coming out of you.
Yeah, yeah.
But
But
like
that's
there's no one
yeah,
to be angry at. You're just mad at the world. Like so it's, yeah, it usually comes out on the controller.
yeah. I don't know, to give some context. I was literally like watching one video of it earlier today, but like people make compilations of all kinds of things, and I've seen some like it was like a general one. It was like saltiest moments in the FGC fighting game community, and then today I saw one. It was like saltiest moments Smash community 20 whatever. But in both of them, whenever Smash came up, it was always like, yeah, someone lost, but they'd get pissed and then they'd spike their controller, and it was like, I guess it's smaller,
Mhm.
it's less expensive than like a stick, which costs
Yeah,
like $200 or whatever. Although I've seen people spike those.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that was a random tangent. I hope whatever.
No, I mean
We're talking
Smash
about.
is, yeah. Unlike, I think about Smash a lot compared to Breaking because
Yeah.
it's so different, and it's like you can have silly names. Like in Breaking, you kind of have to be cool, at least a little bit. But
Sometimes.
Smash, like people name themselves ridiculous things, and it just doesn't matter because you just be good at it.
Yeah. What?
Um,
Yeah.
my favorite thing about it is that it's not subjective. Like you, and that goes for like competitive gaming in general,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that you just win or not,
Yeah.
and you don't have to have all this controversy,
Hmm.
and it's refreshing after like breaking and judging and stuff.
Yeah. That's like one of the issues I think we'll just never escape. I don't think you can escape that kind of thing with breaking. Like you
Mhm.
can try as much as you can, and I think people should uh, to come up with some kind of judging system that's as objective as possible.
Maybe an
But
AI.
yeah, could do.
One
Yeah.
day
Well,
we could train an AI.
yeah. Well, they're getting better with that kind of thing. Creative, or I don't know if you'd call it quote
Mhm.
unquote creative AI. Have you seen that doll, Dolly, what Mini or whatever it's called? It's like
Uh-huh.
this uh, AI art thing. You type in something, and I guess it like pulls images from Google Images, and then like I don't
Hmm.
know, artifies them in some way. But anyway,
Yeah, but no, you're
um,
right. Like it's going to be constantly debated about, and
yeah,
probably never. I mean, I don't know how controversial it is because I don't pay attention to breaking, but I think I'm against it being an Olympic sport, which maybe I'm in the minority. I actually don't know. Um,
I think it's very mixed.
Partially for that reason.
Yeah,
Um, but then there is the good argument though that like they have ice dancing and like that,
yeah,
this is already subjective stuff in
skateboarding too,
the,
right?
yeah, yeah, that are considered sports. So like there's an argument for that, but like
Hmm.
we're way on that end of the spectrum of like very subjective.
Yeah.
Objective.
Well, we can't even agree on what breaking is sometimes, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, but I kind of want to come back to the whole like fighting game parallel because I think that's a super interesting thing. Like if anyone's interested in it, I totally recommend that people like start picking up fighting games in general because I think they're just super interesting. Like if you break as well, like there's a lot of because breaking has that competition side and um, you know there's a lot of things of like learning how to create a combo and stuff like I've drawn all these like random
Yeah,
parallels of like
yeah.
you build a combo in breaking. Well, how do you remember this stuff or whatever? It's like it's sort of the same thing. You like chunk movements together to build these little things, and then you piece those together. And it's the same thing with like if you're playing, I don't know, like Dragon Ball Fighters or whatever. It's like you have your ground part of the combo, and then you launch them, and then you have this part of the combo, and then you do another thing, and then you have this part, and then you
Hmm.
knock them down, and you call it an assist, and then there's that other part. So it's like you remember these chunks,
Yeah,
and then
I agree.
you practice it enough, and then all those things become like in this situation I started with this thing, now it leads into all this stuff. And like
Hmm.
for me with breaking, that's literally how I would do my sets. So like my combos is like, okay, I have uh, this is the starter, it's a CC in this certain way or whatever, and then that leads into all this other movement. And like, I just on YouTube and some of the comments that I see sometimes is like, how do you remember these things? And that's like a really great way
Hmm.
is learning to like chunk information, chunk movements,
Yeah,
and but you got to practice it, right?
yeah. I think it's the exact same part of the brain probably that's
Yeah,
doing that.
yeah,
And it's really satisfying to
mm-hmm.
once you can do those things. And yeah, chunking. My friend and I did a Coursera course called Learning How to Learn. They talked all about that.
Yeah,
And yeah, you like in a fighting game, for example, if you're like, I'm gonna do Shoryuken, initially you have to be like, okay, forward, down, down, forward, punch. But then like once you're say you practice a bunch, now you're in a tournament, like you're just uppercut, like as you just do it.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
um and it's one thing instead of like five things,
yeah,
and that's the chunk.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, and breaking it's the same thing. Like the moves that you're good at, you don't have to be like, okay, I need my hand like kind of this angle so that when I turn, I don't over twist my arm. And it's like you just do the move, and then
Yeah, yeah.
it's satisfying to get there.
And even like, you know, like for me now, just thinking about breaking and thinking about parallels and stuff, it's super interesting to me of like just situations and like just that kind of thing. Like let's say with breaking, you might be like, when you're starting up or when you're earlier in your breaking like career or whatever, you might be like, okay, I'm going to do this and then this and then this, and you really, really plan things out. And that's fine. But I think as you get more experienced, like a really useful method because breaking is so fluid and like the music is different. And if you really want to connect deeply with the music, you have to kind of be adaptable, right? And so a lot of times it can be like, okay, I did this movement, but maybe I tweaked it a little bit, and now I'm in this position. And what can I do from this position? And like, if you've practiced enough and you have enough vocabulary and that kind of thing, things will just start to come out, or you'll recognize certain situations, or you'll put yourself into certain specific situations where you're like, oh, I have all these options. And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with like with fighting games, like, oh, I anti-aired this person, what can I do after that? Okay, what's the situation there? Let's say it's like, I don't know, old school Street Fighter. They're like, you anti-air them and they're popping up. Do I try and like hit them low as they're landing, or do I fake like I'm gonna walk up and hit them, but they're gonna dragon punch, so I block and like,
Mhm.
you know,
Man,
but
that's
yeah, it's all happening like in split second because you've trained these situations, right?
I agree. And that's what the inner game of tennis is about, is
Yeah,
like you can only be in that place, like you can only see the matrix and like all the tree
yeah,
branches and stuff, like if you're not at the same time like criticizing the performance and like
yeah.
thinking about like, what if I lose? Who's like, what about,
Hmm.
is my mom watching? Like that stuff just like crushes all those tree branches
Yeah,
and the pathways. The other thing I was going to say is that I like about fighting games and competitive gaming in general is like it depends what the other person does a lot
yeah,
more.
yeah.
Like I've heard like Breaking
It's
Battle is
true.
described as basically a race. Like it's just you and that person like parallel doing things
Right.
at each other, but like not
Or
not
it's like
really.
this way, that way, this way,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Um, I mean, the best battles, obviously, there is more interaction and there's
Hmm.
like responses and like
Hmm.
maybe some disses, although I don't know if you're still allowed to do a lot of that stuff.
Well, like Free is a really good example of that. Free from Circle of Fire. Like I remember with like Massive Monkey Day Footwork battles, I would end up having to battle him all the time, and he'd always beat me. And at the time when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, maybe I was close, and like, oh, he's just doing this or whatever. But when I look back now, I see that he was taking everything. Not only did he have like good movement and like he was better in the moment. I was still very like, I got to do this and this and this. But he was also better at like looking at what I did and either using certain movements that he does that are similar, or
Mhm.
taking what I did and like kind of throwing it back at me in a sense. And so
Yeah.
it's like what you said, he's actually doing a real battle, or a real
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
there's a conversation going there with him. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
Uh,
hard.
it's awesome when that happens, and if you
Yeah.
can catch it.
Yeah.
Um, I think most of the breaking competitively that happens right now, like
Yeah.
people just have a plan
Yeah.
and like they're gonna do it, and like it's gonna last 5 minutes because their round is so long.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they just you can't. It's limited, I guess. Like I've had situations where I'm like, oh yeah, that is similar to something I do. I'll go ahead and do this
Hmm.
in response. But generally, I think at the high level, like people just have to have some kind of plan
Yeah.
already,
Yeah.
like have your mind made up a little bit,
Yeah.
but
Well,
not
it also
always.
depends on the context, right? If this is like a big competition, or if it's just like a cipher battle,
Hmm.
and you just called this person out, or there's like legitimate beef and you don't like this person, that
Hmm.
might. But even then, it might
Well,
still.
now, like because breaking is so complex and everyone's so good and like specialized, like the likelihood that you're going to have something similar to whatever that person just did, even if you're both like international class, like other than like, oh, he did an air flare, maybe I'll do an air flare or whatever. But like your stuff may be so different, then like it just doesn't even make sense to try to do anything related to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, that's the last thing I'll say about fighting games is that's gamer rage, and that's why it's worse than b-boy rage, I think, except for like if you get ripped off by a judge or something. But it's because that person outsmarted you. Like
Yeah.
they baited your throw and they step back. So your guy is just like, and he just missed his throw, and then they smash you and you just feel like a fool.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
got you. Like they baited your thing out and you did it.
Hmm.
And it's like there's nothing in breaking that's like that. Like if you're mad, it's mostly because like you probably made a mistake and he didn't really force the I mean, maybe your opponent like got in your head or something and did
Hmm.
like a forced error, but it's not the same.
Yeah, yeah. I see, yeah, I totally see what you mean. Fighting games are very like read oriented.
Mm.
And but another thing that I'll say, and it's again, these things are not just fighting games, but like as far as like reads and learning to read those situations and stuff like that, or just recognizing situations and knowing the right way, it's like I think a lot of beginners will even be like, well, how do you know when to do this? And like, I don't know what to do. It's like, well, sometimes it's just putting in the time and putting in the reps and like just going and doing it a lot. And you
Mhm.
don't even necessarily have to be like, okay, well, I want to work on this and like, oh, I did this in the battle, so I should do it. Like, you don't even need all the time like this analytical brain or whatever. I think most people don't do that. But if you just do something enough and you're always looking at ways to improve, just
Mhm.
generally, like that stuff is going to naturally. That's a side effect of like recognizing certain situations.
Mhm.
And like you kind of mentioned this too, and it's come up a lot in all these conversations, is the idea of like having a good coach or a good mentor and someone to guide you through these things,
Mhm.
to point out these little things that you might not notice. Yeah, we kind of went off on this like long tangent about fighting games, but I think it's important for people to think about like
Mhm.
parallels and stuff. But I want to talk just a little bit more about yeah, just your time with dangerous goods and maybe yeah, like, well, okay, that's those are two separate things. So yeah, we'll start with just dangerous goods and get a little more info on that and your experiences with them.
Sure. What to say about dangerous goods? We got along, I think, pretty quickly. First time we met in Regina, Saskatchewan, um, where we hung out like after a battle. First we battled. Like, we met them first competing against them,
Hmm.
and they won. But they were cool, and we went to their hotel room. They invited us, and like there was like eight of them in like a two bed thing, like laying under the table, and they had Naruto on the laptop just going. Um,
Nice.
but they were also drinking, um, so we got along, and yeah, I think ultimately, like I found out later, like yeah, they there was some discussion over like whether I would be included, and it was I think it was like Andy. It was obvious that he was going to be really good,
Hmm.
and he was a natural, and that he would represent them well, and I was kind of like a wild card,
Hmm.
but I think I've done enough that like at least I can hang like
All right.
with the rest of them by now. But I'm glad I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
I think. But then yeah, the coaching was good when I was there, and
Was it just Bob who was kind of like guiding, helping to guide you?
no, I lived with him, so and he taught at the studio, and so like there was stuff at the studio most days, so I would just go with him.
Right.
So we were just naturally there at the same time.
Yeah.
But he also, yeah, I mean, in that crew, he's I think, the de facto leader and coach most of the time.
Right.
Uh, but no, I spent time with the other ones as well, and everyone has advice to give.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. It's a big crew actually. There's like 14 people actually,
Right.
I think, on the roster. Not
How many of them are of Filipino origin?
uh I think 11.
Yeah, I just know that like
Mhm.
Winnipeg has like a very large Filipino community, and
Mhm.
yeah. But anyway, that's like a random tangent.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I can't seem to get away from them. Like I mean, it started with Andy, and now I live with one. So,
Yeah. Oh.
yeah, this is why I'm in Yaletown now.
Oh, nice. Uh,
But anyway, we battled a lot. I regret not actually being able to participate more as like a big group.
Hmm.
Like there's only two or three times that it was ever like more than three people.
Right.
But no, it made me feel pretty cool. I
Yeah.
was like, that felt like a, if that was like the biggest achievement I had in breaking, like I think that would have been pretty good because I looked up to them and I thought they were very cool
Yeah. Well,
when we
they've
first saw them.
they've definitely like put a, I don't know what you'd call it. They've left their mark on the Canadian breaking scene. I would say, and I hope. I don't know what's going on too much nowadays with them, but I hope that there's some sense of their legacy kind of living on a bit. I know it
Yeah.
doesn't in all kinds of different ways, not necessarily through dangerous goods
Mm.
directly, but like, Bob's doing all kinds of work in Toronto and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Hard to say. There were definitely internal discussions of like who's next.
Hmm.
And they brought in Doodles. That like I think he was the most recent addition after us, and he's really good.
Hmm.
Um, but he that was pretty natural. Like Dark was his coach mostly,
Right.
and we hung out a lot, and it just made sense. But since then, and then it like people moved away, so there's some on the East Coast and some on the West Coast and
Hmm.
some in Winnipeg. And no one could really agree on where to go from there.
Hmm.
And like I also with me and Andy, it was like we would visit them a lot and we spent a lot of time together, and so they like knew us as people.
Yeah.
So the discussion after that was more like there wasn't any real obvious choices, um, and no one like really aiming for it. And all the names that came up were mostly like we just want someone good so we can continue to win battles, is what I felt like.
Right. Yeah.
So some of the names that came out, I was like, we don't hang out with like that guy's already in a crew and is a superstar, and like why are we just like throwing
Yeah.
names out that don't make any sense? Um, so anyway, I think it emerged that like maybe that's it then, and that'll just be that generation
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with is like letting something go that, well, it had its time and it served its purpose, and but maybe it's something new should come up. And
Hmm.
yeah, like crew legacy, if it's natural, I always think if it's natural,
Hmm.
that's great. But if you're like forcing something, you know, that legacy can not necessarily get tarnished, but it just kind of can changes into something else, and now it's just like, well, this is not what it originally was, and now it just has the name.
Hmm.
It's like Star Wars, right? Star Wars used to be this crazy
That's a
thing, and
that's a great example.
it's
That's
evolved into this thing. It's like it's Star Wars in name only. Like it still has lightsabers, there's still Jedi and
yeah.
whatever, but it's not really for people who knew it back then. It's
Mhm.
something different.
That's a
And like at the same time, you can have kids that maybe they see the new Star Wars and they're like, "Oh, this is great." And if they love it, like who am I to say like your opinion is stupid,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, if I hadn't joined them, we still did Alpha Kids in Saskatoon, which was like I guess after Lost Toys, and there was some other crews. Like after a couple of years, a few people dropped off here and there from like Lost Toys, and I think they were called Funky Foreigners, and these other like. So then we all, I think it was just out of necessity that there was a show that needed like it was going to be a long performance, and they wanted like routines, and they wanted a big group. So we naturally, those of us who were still active, came together and we became Alpha Kids.
hmm,
So I'm still like proud of Alpha Kids, and that is like the other crew that I represent.
hmm,
Um, but I mean, yeah, that was something that I felt like I created as opposed to Dangerous Goods was like kind of an achievement at one point.
right, yeah.
And then I think it paid
Oh,
off
okay.
for them. Like I think, sorry, I'm happy that like I was able to at like shortly after joining and spending some time in Winnipeg there, like put in some performances that I think made a difference in like the outcome at competition a couple of times. So I felt like
Right,
I
right.
could like relax that I'm not an imposter here,
Right,
kind of thing.
right. Yeah, that's always good to get that. I don't know, what do you call it? Like validation that, or validation of your self worth. Is that
Yeah.
what that is? I don't know. But yeah, I guess kind of the last thing for now that I want to just talk about is, it's kind of like a weird thing to talk about because it's it's hard to describe sometimes or whatever. But I'm just always sort of interested in how people think about, not just think about breaking, but like how they think about creating, and how, not even like, well, what's original and what's not, that kind of thing, but like, yeah, how you go about creating, or where you draw your influences from. Like Mark is my buddy Mark, which who you know, but for people who don't know, he's like my, I don't know, breaking partner or whatever you want to call it. But
Mhm.
he's always was one of these guys that drew inspirations from all these crazy places, and then they worked their way into his breaking, and
Mhm.
it's so super interesting. Or like, as an example, another example is like, I talked with Rudy Rex recently. A big influence was, I forget who it was, like something Slides, Jimmy Slides or something. He's like a tap dancer. I forget the name, but anyway, he has involves a lot of these different, well, slides things within his tap dancing. And if he never said that, I never would have made that connection. But after hearing that, it's like, oh, that's super. It's just super interesting.
Mhm.
And so I'm always interested in like where people's influence come from, or your just sort of like process and that kind of thing, how you go about creating, if you even have a plan when you create, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I have tried to articulate like a creative process before, but I don't have much luck. Uh, Other than, yeah, I think I have inspirations that wouldn't really surprise most people, just like nerd anime and games,
Well, I'm
and
curious, like,
martial arts. Um,
what anime, what games?
uh, yeah, I get like Dragon Ball was a big one.
Yeah.
Um,
What
I like
aspects of
a lot of
Dragon
the
Ball?
Gundam stuff early on.
Was it certain
Uh,
characters from Dragon Ball, or?
no, I wouldn't say so. Just the like the stances and the martial arts and like the
Oh yeah.
energy stuff. Um, it's stuff being a little over the top, I think, as being a general theme in anime, like everything's exaggerated.
Right, right.
Um,
Huh.
and in games, like especially fighting games, things are very like snappy. I
Mm-hmm.
think that if there's one thing that I would say like aesthetically would be like how things kind of like slow down and speed up.
Hmm.
I know that's pretty vague sounding, but like if you know Makoto in Street Fighter,
Yeah,
she like she charges her like punch and then it's just and it's just
yeah,
super
yeah,
like just stuff like that is it really like pleases me.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
But her walking animation is so slow and like
mhm.
methodical, and then she's got that dash punch. It's just so crazy.
I was really inspired by the Ip Man movie, like the first one
Yeah.
that came out. I think I like, if nothing else, my like top rock changed a lot. There's a lot of like, you know,
Oh, like the hand styles sort
yeah,
of
yeah,
thing, like the
like mostly the upper, yeah,
Wing
upper
Chun
body.
sort of stuff.
Um, but yeah, create like I think a lot of it. There's some like crash to create that I would do, just kind of move around and throw things and like see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Earlier on, yeah, there was a lot of like try something that someone on one of the videos would do, and like usually that wouldn't work, but because I just wouldn't figure out how to execute it, but then like something else similar might emerge.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I got away with a lot of like sort of biting, but like trying the thing, but the thing not working, but like having some like it's just a starting point.
Yeah.
Um,
But that kind of thing is kind of common, I think. That especially when you're starting out, you see something, but uh, Well, it's a little bit different because now there's like a record of everything. But it
Hmm.
used to be. But let's say you go to an event and you see this person and you're like, "Whoa, what did they do? That was crazy. I really like that." And you go home and you try it, but you can't remember it perfectly.
Hmm.
So you remember this like broken, incomplete version, but that becomes something interesting potentially.
Hmm.
Like I heard that's how the like Wiggles like back knee glide or whatever that he does, like back the knee moonwalk. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yeah.
But he's like saw something that Poppy Pete did that was similar, but he had an incomplete memory of it, and it evolved into that
Hmm.
movement, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Creativity. I mean, that's another thing. Like, I think some people would say like just if you just learn the basics and like learn the rules, and then you can just start to break rules, and that's how creativity happens.
Mm.
Like I think some theories about it, not just for breaking, but like in general, are actually that just the more possible things, like creativity isn't actually like just pulling something out of nowhere. It is
Yeah,
actually,
yeah,
some people think that it's always a product of like existing ideas that you have,
hmm,
or like existing knowledge of what's possible, and then just kind of spinning it up into something new.
I definitely think that too.
Um,
It's always being drawn from something, but that doesn't mean that you can't make something new. Like,
yeah, but then I think crash to create is the exception to that rule, because I feel like,
but that's still drawing on your own experiences and what you know and that kind
mhm,
of thing and what you've been exposed to, right? So you're
mhm.
still like if you it depends like how deep you want to look at it. But yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I just the other week I was practicing with Kyle, and he like tried the reverse halo, but then his elbow just got stuck basically, and then it kind of caused him to like twist over.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was cool, do it again. But
Yeah.
like it
Yeah.
wasn't like that was his intention, or that he was
Right. Right.
anywhere trying to do that.
Right. Right.
Um,
I see what you mean.
so that's but that's specific to like physical things, I think.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trying.
Well, there's a lot of things that got invented through accidents or
Yeah.
through mistakes or whatever. And I think, yeah, it's a good, it's definitely a good way to like, you can have, like when you're creating stuff, there's that fine line of like, yeah, I like this idea. And so I want to explore around it. But then there's also, sometimes you just like, gotta just move and do stuff. And like one idea that I'm sure I'm not the first person to think of this, but sometimes as people think like, oh yeah, creativity and like and ideas like some people are just like gifted and they just get it and like yeah, maybe some people get to things quicker than others, but I still think a lot of times it's more about like um volume, like number of ideas and how well you can iterate on those ideas. And like, yeah, having a sense of like picking and choosing, oh,
Mhm.
this is something worth pursuing. But like a lot of times I think of it as like you've got to you've got to like run through all these different ideas and propose a bunch of ideas to yourself
Mhm.
and it's not necessarily like you're super creative. You just run through a bunch of possibilities and you've
Yeah,
explored a lot of different options and then you can pick and choose.
I agree.
Yeah.
Um, there's definitely some movements that I think were just like brute force. Like I think I can do that movement. Like it's a thing movement I've already done, but I think I can like keep doing it enough that it will become smoother, and
Oh,
like polishing a turd, as they say. Like I'm just gonna, whatever movement this is, like if you do it enough, it'll become smooth,
yeah.
and you can flow into it and out of it,
True.
and now it's a move, even though it wasn't
Yeah.
before.
Well, that's getting into like a whole other discussion of like it doesn't matter what you do, it's like how you do it,
Mhm.
that kind of thing.
Mhm.
How you present it. Presenting stuff is really big too. Um,
One
but
thing,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, well, related to like having to choose something to focus on, because like all these new ideas, you don't really know for sure if they're going to pan out.
Hmm.
Um, back when I had a studio in my house in Saskatoon, in the we had like a decent spot in the basement. I consumed more marijuana back then than I do now, and
Hey, sometimes that stuff helps.
would now not so much. I don't find, but
Huh.
back then I would like because I think it's a controlled environment, so there's no like paranoia or anything.
Hmm.
And also, what's key is that I would record it
Mm.
because we would do enough that we couldn't really remember what we had done.
Yeah.
But but that really like makes you just like do the dumbest move over and over again, like hoping it's going to work out. And like sometimes it did, and
Yeah.
you would. I think that's a thing that we can see in other people that like do pot is like they'll think something is really interesting that's not.
Yeah. Well, you just get
But
like focused on something for whatever reason, right?
mhm. Like you'll think something that you or someone else is saying is more profound than it really is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's good about that is that if you're at practice and you like do a move that's like kind of like you'll still give it some time and attention to like maybe
Yeah.
flesh it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, just learning more about um, like design these days in general, and just like there's another good book too about like it's about creativity. It's written by this guy's name is impossible. It's Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. I forget his name, but he's the guy that kind of came up with the concept of like flow,
Mm.
that idea, and in psychology and stuff like that. So he has a book about creativity, which was really interesting, and that's where like some of these ideas of just like uh, amount of ideas from different sources
Hmm.
outside of your domain, or it's like creativities where two different domains start to like blend together and then create
Hmm.
something new. Yeah, but it's a really complex thing that's hard to put into words, I think. And yeah, I appreciate you trying to do it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I liked about Oro, especially in our first thing that I participated in with you guys was like there was a willingness to like flesh those things out. Like there's no
Mm-hmm.
bad ideas.
Yeah.
Like let's try this thing and like give it a really honest effort. Like even if something seemed
Yeah.
like a waste of time,
Mm-hmm.
like it would get full credit until
Yeah.
you were sure that like you would stretch it every which way and like
Yeah.
not not find anything in there.
I think that's something for people who are like interested in this kind of thing to look into, is like really look into like the design thinking process of you know exploring. You explore a certain area and you research what's already been done. You look at what's good, what's bad, where things could improve, and then you come up. You just start brainstorming. That's what we would do a lot of times. Is you come up with all as many ideas as you can, and no idea is stupid, and then you come back together and you kind of pitch these ideas and you kind of pick and choose like, oh, okay, well that seems interesting, or
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe like there's something there, but people got to have an open mind and stuff like that. But yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a whole
I
process too.
I think you and I are probably like what's and maybe that's more of a fighting game term, but lab monsters,
Maybe.
like people who, but I don't know. I mean, you perform really well at a lot of stuff, so I'm not saying you don't, but like, yeah, it's fun to just like sit alone and like make stuff up and like see
Yeah,
where it goes.
yeah. I mean, like I think maybe we just like thinking about these things, like thinking deeply and trying to like break
Mhm.
it down, what's going on or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I was making the point that like, or I was about to say, when you enjoy creating stuff that much and just like having a breadth of material, the challenge is like deciding what you're going to use if you need to perform and you're going to battle somebody for 2 rounds and now
Yeah,
everything collapses and it's like, okay, I like this one move, but I actually haven't practiced it that much because I spend my time just like going through all this stuff.
yeah,
So I've encountered that a few times. Like execution errors have always been a problem for me. But then I like when people will practice with me or like are at an event where there's ciphers and stuff, like I do get the feedback like you have a lot of material,
yeah,
you know, a lot
yeah,
of stuff.
Yeah.
which I'm like, yeah, yeah, I like to make stuff, but I think it's a lot of like none of them are like bangers. Is has always been my like self-criticism is like
I don't know about that.
I don't know if I could like blow the roof off the place reliably. That's always the challenge for me. But I think
Yeah.
you know, if I had the stamina, which I don't, but if I did to battle people like 20 rounds, I think I would be able to like have
Yeah.
new stuff, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think like this is just my opinion, but there's certain people have certain styles that like you're not necessarily one of the people that's like, oh, you got to know exactly about breaking and all the intricate details to really get his style.
Mm.
But like, you do have one of those styles. This is my opinion. Like, you do have one of those styles that if you don't really completely know what you're looking at, you're gonna miss a lot of cool, interesting details.
Mm.
Um, but I think like your style had that sort of blend of this abstract kind of movements and like you said it has these like fast and slow, these like ramps up in speed and things like that that do make it dynamic without it being say like a backflip kind of dynamic
Mm.
or a quadruple air flare dynamic. It's like a different kind of dynamic. But if people aren't necessarily used to that thing, it's like it might go over some people's heads.
Yeah, that's always a consideration. And I'm not like someone who like I don't care. I break for the love of the game and I don't care what anyone thinks. Um, because there's such a thing to me as going too far in that direction
Yeah, yeah,
of like, oh, you just don't get it. Like if you're not seeing how I like cross my fingers like this when I did this one move, like
yeah.
the b-boys are gonna see that and they're gonna think it's like a 5-star move. But like the mom at the festival isn't gonna catch it. But I
Yeah,
don't care what she thinks. Like that's
yeah,
no, that's silly. Like I think you have to. There's definitely stuff that I don't do. I've been like, there's no way people are gonna catch this enough. Like I'm not just gonna do it because I know it was there. Like I secretly snuck in a move just for me. But that stuff, I mean, yeah, there's uh my friend who doesn't break but who knows about breaking said I'm a b-boy's b-boy once.
you can see that.
And I've heard in UFC, I think I've heard people have been called like a fighter's fighter.
Well, it was like Norm
There's like
Macdonald
people,
was the comedian's comedian, right?
yeah. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I don't want to go too far in that direction because like this stuff is fun and it has broad appeal.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I think you can do stuff that's consumable to the average person
Yeah,
that is also like stylish and creative.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't think you have to choose
yeah. Well, it's
necessarily.
it's all a balance, right? Yeah, like you said, you can go too far, and that's like anything. You can go too far with anything, not just breaking related, but literally anything in life. Technology's great, but you have too much of it, it's not good.
Hmm.
You don't have enough of it, man. You're like taking a crap on the on the street or something. Right? I don't know. That was a weird example, but
Yeah, yeah. What is art even? Is that?
yeah, yeah, right. There you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's maybe a good spot to finish. Is taking a dump on the street, and it's art. Um, but yeah, Braden, really, really appreciate you taking the time to just share a bit of your history and your just perspectives on stuff, and it was good to just kind of chat and talk about these things with someone. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, thank
Hopefully,
you.
people enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm glad you reached out. I haven't like had a good conversation like this in a while. Most of my life now, like I practice semi consistently, but most of my life is not breaking right now. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's exciting. But yeah, I'm glad you're still doing it. I mean, it's been a while now, and I'm subscribed to you on YouTube, and I see that's pretty consistent. So
Yeah. Well, it was a little.
congratulations.
I had a little break from doing the podcast, but I have some extra time again, so I'm trying to
Mhm.
put in the hours and just
What
get
time is it
stuff.
there now?
It's about like 2 p.m.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be worse. That's not so
No, no,
bad.
no, 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 no. It's all right.
And I'm excited that you're in Japan. That's very cool that you just did that. Like,
Yeah. Well, it's been an experience, and there's a lot of ups and downs and things that I learned. But it's like you said, we'll bring this full circle. That getting outside of your what you know and going to experience new things and getting different perspectives is always really helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah, even if what you want is maybe back where you come from or whatever, uh, yeah, or if you like the thing that you went and saw, like it just gives you new perspectives, right?
Mhm.
It's always useful.
Agreed.
But yeah, thanks Braden. Thanks everyone who listened and watched. Hope it was fun, and we'll see you in the next one.
All right.
Peace.
Peace out.